The sky above Earth is suddenly shattered by a massive fleet, hundreds of Draconian ships descending to destroy everything in their path. But just as humanity braces for extinction, something unimaginable happens. Their ships start to vanish, one by one, as if they're being pulled into another dimension. What is causing this? Could Earth's defenses be far more advanced than anyone realized? Stay with us to uncover the shocking truth. Before we dive deeper into the mystery, make sure you're subscribed to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story for more jaw-dropping tales like this one. Like this video if you think Earth's secret power is the key to humanity's survival. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is happening to the Draconian fleet? And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a mind-bending episode. Now, let's get back to the heart of the mystery. What's really happening to the Draconians? Is Earth the universe's ultimate weapon, or is this all just one big cosmic coincidence? Stick around, because the answers will leave you speechless. Captain Diane Miller stood frozen in front of the radar screen, her heart pounding as the tiny dots appeared at the edge of the solar system. Hundreds of them. Alien ships. Her breath caught in her throat as she blinked twice, hoping it was a mistake. But no. They were getting closer, moving fast, and their formation was unmistakable, an armada. The sheer scale of it was beyond comprehension. "Sir, you need to see this," she called out to Admiral Gregory Hayes, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to the radar. The Admiral walked over, his face draining of color. His eyes locked onto the screen, and for a moment, it was as though time had frozen. "How many?" he asked, his voice tight, barely audible. "Over 300 ships, sir. No friendly codes. They're coming straight for Earth." Hayes picked up the red phone, his hand shaking just slightly. This was it, the call no one ever wanted to make. The fate of Earth was hanging by a thread, and no one knew if the planet was even ready for what was coming. A single alien ship could wipe out a city. 300? There wasn't enough firepower on Earth to hold them back. In the command center, the tension was palpable. Earth's military forces were scrambling, fighter jets rushed to their launch pads, missile defense systems were powered up, and in every corner of the world, bases went on high alert. But deep down, everyone knew the truth: Earth stood little chance. As Hayes looked around the room, he knew it. He was staring at the end of human civilization. Dr. Alan Wright, Earth's top xenobiologist, entered the room, clearly frazzled. He'd spent his entire career preparing for the possibility of first contact, but nothing could have prepared him for this. "What do we know about them?" he asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. Captain Miller, though visibly shaken, explained the readings. "The ships don't match any known designs. The energy signatures are off the charts. And they're slowing down, taking position around Mars' orbit. Are they transmitting anything?" Before Wright could respond, every screen in the room flickered. And then, it happened. A face appeared. Or at least, it looked like a face. The creature was reptilian, its skin tough, scaled, and ridged, as though its eyebrows were carved into its skull. Its eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and when it opened its mouth, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleamed in the light. A voice filled the room, speaking in perfect English. "I am the Supreme Overlord of the Draconian Empire. Your planet is now under our control. You have 72 hours to surrender all government forces to Draconian rule. Any resistance will result in planetary bombardment." The face vanished, and a thick silence fell over the room. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that filled the air like a heavy fog, suffocating everyone present. "How did it speak English?" someone asked, breaking the silence. "Universal translator," Dr. Wright said flatly. "Any advanced civilization would have one. But that's not important right now." Then came the chilling words that everyone had feared: 72 hours. Admiral Hayes grabbed the microphone. "All stations, this is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. First contact protocol is now in effect. Meanwhile, at Fort Benning in Georgia, Sergeant Paul Davis watched the message replay on his phone with his special operations team. "Think our bullets will even work on them?" one of his men asked, eyes wide with disbelief. "We'll find out soon enough," Davis said grimly, grabbing his gear. "I bet we're moving out soon." Back in the command center, Captain Miller was staring at her monitor, unable to tear her eyes away. "Dr. Wright, look at these energy readings from their flagship," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Wright studied the display. "That's odd," he muttered. "The energy pulse is unstable, almost like it's malfunctioning. Is that normal for a spaceship?" "I have no idea what's normal for alien technology," Wright admitted. "But it doesn't seem efficient. And look, the pulse pattern changes when they communicate." Across the world, governments were preparing for the worst. In the White House, President Harris sat in the Situation Room, his face grim as he listened to Admiral Hayes explain the situation. "How bad is it, Admiral?" the President asked. "Sir, based on their weapon signatures, a single one of their ships could destroy a major city. And they have over 300. Our military options are limited. We're outgunned by at least 1,000 to 1. The President nodded, his face pale. "Then we need to buy time. Send a message. Tell them we're considering their demands. Request a meeting." In his lab, Dr. Wright was working quickly, analyzing the alien energy readings. "These don't make sense," he muttered, adjusting his equipment. "It's almost like their ships are being affected by something. The energy fluctuations increase as they get closer to Earth." But then, something strange happened. On the main Draconian ship, Supreme Overlord Krytax slammed his fist down on the console. "What do you mean we lost contact with the scout ship?" he growled at his officer. "It entered Earth's atmosphere 13 minutes ago, Supreme 1. All signals stopped. No distress calls." Krytax's yellow eyes narrowed in rage. "Send another with backup this time." Back at Defense Station Alpha, Captain Miller and her team tracked the movement of 2 more alien ships breaking off from the main fleet. They were heading straight for Earth's atmosphere. Suddenly, both ships vanished from the radar. "Did we lose radar contact?" Admiral Hayes demanded. "No, sir," the radar operator replied. "All systems are functioning normally. They just vanished." Dr. Wright's equipment spiked wildly. "That's impossible," he muttered, his voice shaking. They're gone. Just like that." A call came in from NASA's Deep Space Tracking Station. "Sir, we're picking up strange communications from the Draconian fleet. They sound confused. Maybe even panicked." Hayes stared at Miller, his face pale. "What the hell is happening?" Miller simply shook her head. "I don't know, sir. But whatever it is, it might be our only chance." And then, the Draconian fleet began to vanish. Entire ships, in the blink of an eye, flickering and disappearing like smoke in the wind. The world was left in stunned silence. And for the first time in history, humanity was forced to confront a truth no one could have imagined. Earth, a tiny blue planet lost in the vast cosmos, had somehow become the most powerful force in the galaxy. And in that moment, as the fleet vanished into thin air, Captain Miller found herself wondering if she had somehow imagined it all. Then, as the room went quiet, Dr. Wright finally spoke up. "Well, at least we didn't have to clean up after them." And the room erupted with laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from sheer disbelief. The aliens may have vanished, but the real question remained, was this the beginning of something new, or had humanity just escaped a fate it wasn't ready to face? In the end, the only thing certain was that Earth wasn't done with surprises just yet. The Draconian fleet had arrived, and Earth was scrambling to prepare for what seemed like certain annihilation. As Captain Diane Miller and Admiral Hayes stared at the radar screens, the realization hit them hard. Over 300 ships, each larger and more powerful than any weapon humanity had ever designed, were bearing down on Earth. Miller couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to face. The fear was palpable, a cold weight that seemed to freeze the very air inside the command center. But it wasn't just fear she felt. There was something else gnawing at her, a deep, unsettling knowledge. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, studying alien technologies, protocols, and defense strategies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the cold reality of a battle she knew Earth couldn't win. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. They were insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy. Her mind flashed back to the training exercises, to the countless simulations she had endured. In all of them, humanity had stood its ground. In all of them, Earth had survived. But those were simulations. Those were theoretical victories. This was real. The towering Draconian ships weren't a figment of someone's imagination. They were here, now, at the edge of the solar system, and they were coming for Earth. Miller's fingers hovered over the communication button. She hesitated. What could she possibly say? The whole world was watching, waiting for a glimmer of hope, a sign that humanity wasn't going to be wiped off the map without a fight. But no matter what words she spoke, it wouldn't change the fact that the odds were overwhelmingly against them. The air was thick with tension as Admiral Hayes barked out orders, the sound of his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. All military bases, go to maximum alert. Get our ships in position. His words were mechanical, as though he, too, was trying to force himself into some semblance of normalcy. But even the toughest military leaders knew that when you're staring down the barrel of extinction, all the strategies in the world couldn't help you. Meanwhile, in the underground labs, Dr. Alan Wright was on a different front line. He wasn't fighting with weapons or tactics, he was fighting with knowledge. His fingers danced across the consoles, trying to make sense of the data they had just received. These energy readings are off the charts, he muttered to himself, but the words didn't provide any comfort. He was too focused on the information flashing before him, too absorbed in trying to understand how something so fundamentally alien could cause such a disturbance. Dr. Wright had studied xenobiology his entire career, preparing for first contact. He was supposed to be the calm voice of reason, the man who could break down the unknown into something understandable. But right now, all he saw was chaos. The Draconian ship's energy signatures didn't match anything they had encountered before, and their technology seemed flawed. There was a pulse, a pattern, that seemed to indicate instability. And that instability, strangely enough, was their only hope. In the midst of all the chaos, Miller glanced at the monitor once more. The fleet was close now. She could almost feel the ground trembling beneath her boots. Her mind, however, wasn't focused on the battle ahead. It was drifting back to a moment years ago when she had first enlisted. Back then, the world had seemed full of possibilities. She had believed in something greater, the idea that humanity could overcome anything, that Earth was worth fighting for. But that was before she had seen what war could truly do. Before she had lost friends in distant places, to distant causes that had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with the world she had pledged to protect. War was a dirty thing, something you couldn't come back from without scars, some physical, others not so obvious. Her thoughts were interrupted by the flash of a new signal on the screen. Something had changed. A ship, massive and ominous, began to move. But instead of advancing on Earth, it flickered, shimmering as though it was caught in some sort of distortion. For a moment, it was there, and then, it was gone. As though it had never existed at all. Did we lose contact? Admiral Hayes asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. No, sir, came the reply. It didn't disappear, it vanished. And then it happened again. One by one, more ships began to flicker, each one vanishing into thin air. The command center fell into stunned silence. What the hell was happening? Dr. Wright's face drained of color as his instruments began to spike, their readings fluctuating wildly. This is impossible, he whispered. They're being pulled somewhere. But where? Miller's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. It's Earth, she said, barely above a whisper. Earth's magnetic field, it's rejecting them. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Earth, the unassuming, tiny planet at the edge of the galaxy, wasn't just being invaded, it was fighting back. Earth's natural defenses, something humanity had never understood, were at work. And it wasn't a simple shield or weapon. No, this was something far more complex. Something ancient. As the last of the Draconian fleet disappeared from the radar, Miller's fingers slowly released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A strange, dark humor bubbled up inside her. They had won, by accident. I guess Earth was just too much for them, she muttered, a sardonic smile creeping onto her lips. The world, as it turned out, wasn't quite ready for the cosmic spotlight it had been thrust into. The Earth had always been a little too naive, a little too unaware of its importance in the grand scheme of things. And yet, here it was, standing at the crossroads of intergalactic diplomacy, with no clue what to do next. Damn, Miller murmured, her voice dry as she looked at the empty screens. Guess we should have gotten a welcome mat after all. Dr. Alan Wright stared at the data flickering across his screens, the numbers and waveforms dancing like some chaotic dance of patterns he couldn't quite understand. His lab was the only place in Earth Defense Station Alpha where it was quiet enough for him to think. But even here, in the solitude of blinking machines and data pouring out in real time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something huge was slipping through his fingers. For years, Wright had worked tirelessly, studying alien life, preparing for this very moment, the moment when humanity would encounter another species. He had never imagined it would be like this. The Draconian fleet, vast and menacing, was above them, in orbit around Mars, threatening Earth with destruction. And yet, here he was, sitting in a laboratory, learning something far stranger and far more dangerous than he could have ever predicted. Earth was fighting back. The electromagnetic field surrounding Earth, something humanity had long regarded as just another environmental phenomenon, was reacting to the Draconian technology. It wasn't a shield, it wasn't a weapon. No, it was more like an immune system, rejecting the invaders as though the planet itself had developed a defense mechanism over millennia of cosmic evolution. But the problem was, no one knew how or why. Dr. Wright, what exactly are we looking at? Admiral Hayes' voice crackled through the intercom as he entered the lab. He had always been a man of action, preferring to make decisions quickly, decisively. But today, he sounded uncertain. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Admiral, this isn't just Earth's magnetic field, Wright muttered, rubbing his temples as his eyes scanned the readings again. It's like the planet has a form of self-defense built into its very electromagnetic signature. It's rejecting the Draconian ships, but we can't figure out why. It's not just a random occurrence, it's targeted. Like Earth knows it's being invaded and is pushing back. Hayes walked over, his boots clicking on the lab's metallic floor. His face was etched with the kind of exhaustion that came with weeks of non-stop stress. He leaned over Wright's shoulder, trying to make sense of the information on the screen. Are you saying Earth is alive? Hayes asked, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Wright shook his head, frustrated. Not alive in the way we think about it. But, yes, in a sense. There's something deep in the planet's geological structure, some ancient, perhaps even alien feature. It's like Earth was designed to reject these kinds of invaders. But why? And by whom? As the two men stood there, staring at the screen, the silence of the lab was suddenly interrupted by a sharp beep. A new signal had appeared on their monitors, one that wasn't coming from the Draconian fleet. It was faint, intermittent, and unlike anything they had encountered. What's that? Hayes asked, his eyes narrowing. Wright leaned in closer, scanning the frequency. It's not human. It's coming from deep space, way beyond the solar system. It's old. Really old. The signal continued to pulse erratically, almost as though it were struggling to break through the interference surrounding it. And then, in an instant, a chilling realization struck Wright. It's a warning, he whispered, more to himself than to Hayes. This is the answer we've been looking for. Earth's been marked. The Draconians aren't the first. This planet, this system, has been considered dangerous for millennia. Marked as a no-go zone. A shiver ran down Hayes' spine. Who marked it? I don't know, Wright replied, his voice filled with disbelief. But I think it's the reason the Draconians are here. They've been drawn to us because Earth is something different. Something that the galaxy's older civilizations have feared. There's a history here, one we weren't aware of. Something ancient. The room grew cold. Hayes felt it, the weight of an entire galaxy's distrust bearing down on them. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the idea that humanity was no longer the center of the universe, but instead, a planet caught in a web of ancient, galactic politics. A planet no one dared approach, a planet now under siege by those who had ignored the warnings. Wright sat back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. We've been so focused on what's happening now, we've completely missed what's been happening for centuries. Earth isn't just a random target. It's a focal point for something much larger than any of us can comprehend. Then why didn't the Draconians leave when their ships started vanishing? Hayes asked, still grasping for answers, trying to hold on to the hope that there was a simple explanation. Wright hesitated before speaking, his voice heavy with resignation. Because the Draconians don't understand what's happening either. Their technology isn't equipped to deal with the forces at play here. And that's why they're desperate. That's why they keep trying to land, to fight. They can't fathom that Earth itself is rejecting them. They've never encountered a species or a planet like this before. As the minutes ticked by, a new sense of dread settled over the command center. Humanity was stuck in the middle of something far beyond their control. The Draconians weren't just a military threat, they were a part of a much bigger puzzle, and Earth was the key. The planet's defenses, as misunderstood as they were, had worked in its favor, at least for now. Hayes looked at Wright one last time, his expression hardening. Then we better figure out how to use this to our advantage. If Earth can fight back, we need to make sure it stays that way. Wright nodded, his gaze still fixed on the mysterious signal. We need to know more about Earth's past, about who marked us, and why. But we might not have much time. The following hours were spent scrambling for information, but it felt like they were chasing shadows. For every question answered, two more popped up in its place. Earth had become a galactic enigma, and no one had any answers. The Draconians might have underestimated the planet's defenses, but what lay ahead was far more terrifying. As Wright analyzed the signal, Hayes sat back in his chair, arms crossed, staring into the distance. I suppose we should send them a thank you note for not destroying us yet, he muttered. Wright glanced over at him, a half-smile creeping onto his face despite the gravity of the situation. Maybe after we figure out how to stop them from coming back. Right, Hayes said, a dark chuckle escaping him. Next time, let's hope we don't have to rely on ancient defense mechanisms. Or a damn miracle. Both men looked at the screen, wondering how much longer this fragile peace would last. Or a damn miracle, Wright echoed, his voice heavy with the irony of it all. Because that's the best plan we've got. The Draconian fleet hovered menacingly above Earth, a vast armada ready to crush the planet under its weight. Hundreds of ships, their silhouettes looming against the starry backdrop of space, slowly advanced toward the blue marble below. Every second that passed brought them closer to humanity's end. Admiral Hayes watched the screen with clenched fists, the sound of his own breathing the only thing filling the quiet command center. The cold reality of it all was suffocating. There was no escaping it now. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was the fight, the one humanity had no choice but to face. He glanced over at Captain Miller, who stood rigid by the radar, her eyes locked on the blips that signified the Draconian ships. For all the years she had trained for moments like this, there was no preparedness for this. No book could have prepared them for this cold, brutal fact. Earth had no chance. Not without a miracle. The command center was silent, the only noise coming from the occasional hum of the computers as the Draconian fleet continued its steady descent. Hayes ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the chaos unraveling before him. The Draconians were doing what they did best, invading, conquering, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. But as the moments passed, something strange happened. The fleet was still there, too still. Then, suddenly, the first ship on the screen blinked out of existence. What the hell was that? Miller muttered, leaning closer to her monitor. Hayes stiffened. Did we lose it? No, sir, came the technician's voice over the intercom, sounding just as confused as everyone else. It just disappeared. Another flash. Another ship gone, as if it had never existed. Hayes blinked, his mind racing to catch up with the impossible. The ships weren't just vanishing, they were disappearing into thin air, like smoke being sucked into a vacuum. This was no coincidence, no glitch. There was something happening here that no one could explain. Get Dr. Wright, Hayes ordered, his voice strained with disbelief. He needed answers. They all did. The tension was unbearable as they waited. No one spoke. Everyone was too busy staring at the screen, watching in stunned silence as more and more ships blinked out of existence, one by one. First a few, then 10, then dozens. The Draconian fleet was disintegrating in real time. Dr. Wright burst into the room, looking flustered as he rushed to the control panel. What's happening? He asked, his voice tense. Why are they disappearing? Admiral Hayes didn't even look at him. He pointed to the screen. You tell me. We've lost more than a third of their fleet in the last few minutes. Dr. Wright knelt down at the console, his fingers flying over the keys, his brow furrowed in concentration. I don't know. This isn't possible. The energy readings they're off the charts. Earth's electromagnetic field is interacting with their ships in ways we've never seen before. It's pulling them out of their dimension. Pulling them out? Hayes echoed, his voice bitter with disbelief. Where are they going? I think they're being transported, Wright said slowly, as if trying to wrap his mind around it. Somewhere else. I've never seen anything like it, but Earth's magnetic field is creating a kind of dimensional rift. The Draconian ships are being sucked into it, like they're being pushed out of our reality. Dimensional rift? Miller asked, her voice barely a whisper. Are you saying they're vanishing into another dimension? Wright nodded, his eyes wide with realization. That's exactly what's happening. It's like Earth itself is acting as a kind of protective shield. Every time a ship comes too close, it gets sucked into the rift. They're not being destroyed. They're being displaced. The room went quiet again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of awe, the kind of stillness that settles when something far beyond comprehension begins to unfold. What happens to them? Hayes asked, his voice cold, his mind already calculating the next steps. They were still in danger. The Draconians might have been pushed away, but what would come next? How long would this strange phenomenon last? Dr. Wright hesitated before responding, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I don't know. I think they're being trapped. They're still alive, but they're stuck somewhere in between dimensions. If the field stays like this, they can't escape. They can't even interact with our world anymore. They're just stuck. A brief flicker on the screen confirmed it. Another ship, then two more, vanished from the radar, leaving nothing behind but static. We're winning, Miller muttered, almost as though she couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. We're actually winning. It was the first glimmer of hope anyone had felt since the invasion began, but even that wasn't enough to drown out the gnawing sense of unease. What was this thing that was happening to the Draconian ships? What cosmic force had created such a powerful field? Could Earth really control this force, or was it something entirely beyond their understanding? The thought hit Miller like a gut punch. What if they didn't even want to control it? What if this was the planet's defense mechanism acting without their control? Would they have to fight it to survive? Wright stood up, his eyes still glued to the screen. The ships are vanishing, Hayes. There's nothing we can do about it. Don't say that like it's a good thing, Hayes shot back, his words sharp, tinged with the bitterness of countless battles fought with no victory. Because I don't trust this. No matter how much we've won today, there's always a bigger fight waiting for us. Miller looked at the flickering screen, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. They had survived. They had fought back. For now, Earth was safe, but at what cost? Well, Admiral, Wright said, with the faintest hint of a smile, looks like Earth's magnetic field has a serious case of don't mess with me. Miller's laugh was short, but real. For a moment, despite everything, the absurdity of it all was enough to make her forget the looming threat, enough to let her laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Right, Hayes muttered, rolling his eyes. Maybe next time, Earth will just send them a bill. The Draconian fleet, once an overwhelming shadow hanging over Earth, was now reduced to flickering ghosts on the radar. Each ship that disappeared sent a shiver down the spine of every person in the command center. No one could explain it. No one could grasp the sheer impossibility of it all. How was it possible that the mightiest fleet in the galaxy could simply vanish? It wasn't some miracle weapon. It wasn't advanced technology. It was Earth itself, an ancient, powerful, and completely unexplainable force that had rejected the invaders. Admiral Hayes watched, still processing what had just happened. His mind was racing, a million questions firing off with no answers in sight. He leaned forward, his hands pressed against the table, his gaze fixed on the monitor. "Where are they going?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The Draconian ships weren't being destroyed, they were being pulled somewhere, out of their reality. Wright, now looking more like a mad scientist than a calm and collected expert, couldn't tear his eyes away from the screens. The readings were like nothing he had ever encountered. It's as if Earth's electromagnetic field is a kind of filter, he said, his voice trailing off, caught between awe and disbelief. "We're not just lucky, Admiral. This is something the galaxy has never seen. Earth wasn't meant to be this powerful. It's a fluke." Hayes shook his head, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. "A fluke? It feels more like a bad joke." Dr. Wright didn't respond. Instead, he started typing furiously, gathering more data. For the first time since the attack began, he allowed himself to entertain a thought, a dangerous thought, that this wasn't some random cosmic accident. What if Earth had always been different? What if this was more than just Earth's defenses at work? "I think I understand," Wright said suddenly, his voice cracking. "It's the electromagnetic pulse, it's resonating with their technology. It's like a massive feedback loop. It disrupts their systems, pulls them out of phase. They're being shifted into a different dimensional space. Not gone. Trapped. Trapped?" Hayes repeated, his disbelief cutting through the words like a knife. "They can't escape?" "No, sir," Wright said, barely keeping his excitement in check. "They can't. Not without our help. The field is too strong. They don't know how to fight it. They've never encountered anything like this. And that's why they're in panic mode." In the corner of the room, Captain Miller stood still, her eyes wide as she watched the Draconian ships vanish one by one. They had been fighting an enemy they believed to be invincible, and now they were winning. But victory felt hollow. The ships disappearing, pulled out of their dimension, left her with a gnawing emptiness in her chest. What was the cost of this victory? What had humanity lost to even get to this point? Her mind wandered back to the last battle she had fought. A skirmish in the outer colonies years ago, when humanity was still fighting for survival against factions within their own species. That fight had been brutal, leaving no one unscarred, physically, mentally. People lost loved ones, lost friends. The cruelty of war wasn't just in the bloodshed, it was in the dehumanizing of people. The way it made monsters of the innocent. The way it twisted humanity's soul into something unrecognizable. And here they were, facing an enemy that wasn't even human, and yet, the scars they were creating would be just as permanent. "You can't just erase that," she muttered to herself. "Nothing ever goes back to the way it was. After the blood is spilled, after everything's destroyed, there's no going back. Only survival." The thought gnawed at her as much as the victory did. She wondered if, someday, humanity would look back at this moment and see it as the beginning of something darker, something even more insidious than the war they were trying to avoid. How long could Earth keep running from its past? How long before humanity destroyed itself from the inside out? Captain? Wright's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He was standing behind her now, his face as pale as ever. We need to prepare for what comes next. The Draconians are still out there, and they're still a threat. She nodded slowly, her hands shaking as she reached for the controls. And what happens when they come back? She asked quietly. What happens when the feedback loop stops? Wright paused, then turned away, his gaze shifting to the data flickering on the screen. We don't know. But for now, Earth's defenses are holding. That's all we can do. The Draconians were still out there, floating somewhere in the void. The few ships that hadn't disappeared remained in orbit, their crews undoubtedly scrambling to understand what had happened. How could an entire fleet, one that had conquered countless worlds, be vanquished by nothing more than a planet's electromagnetic field? Hayes stared at the last remaining Draconian ship on the radar. If we can stop them from coming back, then maybe we can finally breathe, he said, his voice strained. But I don't trust this. It's not over. It can't be. Of course not, Miller replied, her eyes dark. We never get to win. Not truly. War doesn't allow for that. The words felt too true as she stared at the empty spaces where the ships had vanished. War didn't allow for victories. It only allowed for survival. For now. As Hayes stared at the final Draconian ship, a bitter chuckle escaped his lips. Well, we've got them on the ropes, he muttered. And Earth, of course, is just showing off its hidden talents. He turned to Miller, his lips twitching into a sardonic grin. Maybe next time we'll just invite the Draconians for a tea party and call it a day. Miller's laugh was dark, short, and laced with irony. Yeah, right. Maybe we'll all sing Kumbaya and get them to surrender. Perfect plan. The silence in the command center was deafening. The once overwhelming hum of the massive Draconian fleet, advancing with calculated precision, had suddenly been replaced by eerie calm. More ships vanished, the red blips on the radar flickering into nothingness. No explosions, no gunfire, just empty space. It was as if the fleet had never existed. A bad dream made manifest and then erased in the blink of an eye. Captain Miller stood at the front of the room, staring at the screens with a look of disbelief that she couldn't shake. The planets had aligned. Humanity had survived. At least, that's what they were being told. But a part of her, the part that had been trained for war, knew it wasn't over. There were no happy endings in this life, not for people like her, not for soldiers. And war, no matter how small or large, left its mark on the soul. In the corner of the room, Dr. Alan Wright was a picture of anxiety. He was leaning over his instruments, his fingers trembling as he tried to make sense of the data that was still pouring in. It doesn't make sense, he muttered to himself. The field's amplification, it's like it's learning, adapting. Earth's magnetic field is rejecting them, but why now? Why this? Miller walked over to him, her boots clicking softly on the cold floor. She studied the chaotic streams of data, the graphs and pulses of light that were supposed to explain everything. But the more she looked, the more it felt like the world was spinning out of control, like they were simply passengers on a ship that was already sinking. Dr. Wright looked up, meeting her eyes with an expression of helplessness. This was never supposed to happen. I've spent my career studying the electromagnetic fields around Earth, but this is unprecedented. There's no explanation for why it's targeting the Draconians. It's almost as if Earth is alive in a way we never imagined. Miller's gaze softened. She understood the science, or at least she tried to. But this wasn't science anymore. This was survival. And survival had a price. You think Earth knew, she asked quietly, that this planet was meant to fight back? Dr. Wright's response was interrupted by a shrill beep from one of the terminals. Miller turned to look. More ships had vanished, an entire division erased from existence. And the panic was palpable. A ripple of fear spread through the command center. Earth's defenses weren't just holding, they were obliterating the Draconian fleet. But there was no celebration. There couldn't be. Not when so much was still unknown. We don't know what we're dealing with, Miller said, her voice low but firm. And we don't know if they're coming back. But what I do know is that we've seen this before. She glanced at the room, at the faces of the soldiers and scientists. So many of them looked like they had been saved, like they had won a battle that shouldn't have been won. But they had seen war before. All of them had. And there was no joy in survival when you knew what came next. Miller's mind drifted back to the last war she had fought. It wasn't against aliens, it was against other humans, fellow soldiers in a forgotten conflict. The faces of her fallen comrades flashed in her mind. The laughter, the warmth of shared meals before the first shots were fired. The hope that they could make a difference. And then the reality of it all. The screams, the blood, the bodies. The part of her that had been torn apart, piece by piece, as each day wore on. The part of her that never truly healed. She snapped back to the present, shaking off the memories. No time for that. Not now. She had to focus. Earth had done the impossible, but what would it cost? Dr. Wright was still hunched over his equipment, muttering under his breath, lost in the chaos of the data. But Miller's thoughts had shifted back to the battle at hand. It wasn't over. The Draconians would figure it out. They had to. Even if their technology couldn't stand up to Earth's natural defense, they weren't just going to give up. And if they didn't, humanity would face a reckoning it wasn't prepared for. The doors to the command center burst open, and Admiral Hayes strode in, his face grim. "We need to prepare for the next phase," he said. "The Draconians are retreating, but they're not gone. We can't count on this field to save us forever." Wright's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "They're still out there," Hayes interrupted, his tone deadly serious. "You saw what happened. Every time they try to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, they get pulled out again. But we don't know where they're going. If they're going anywhere." Miller exchanged a look with Dr. Wright. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Do we wait for them to come back, or do we go after them?" Hayes looked tired. "We don't have the resources to chase them. Not right now. We need to prepare for the worst, because if they figure this out, they'll find a way to counter it. And if that happens, we'll be back to square one. And God help us then." Silence fell over the room again. The tension, thick as tar, hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Miller looked at her team. They had survived, yes. But the war wasn't over. It never was. War wasn't about victory, it was about survival. And no one had ever taught them how to survive after the battle was won. No one had ever told them how to deal with the aftermath. She let out a breath, a grim chuckle escaping her lips as the enormity of the situation settled on her shoulders. "Well, it looks like Earth's defenses aren't just a fluke after all," she said, with a touch of sarcasm. "Maybe we should start selling tickets to this show. Earth, the planet with extra-dimensional protection, now available for invaders." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation too heavy to allow any humor to fully settle. But Miller's words, dark as they were, managed to lift the tension just a fraction. "Yeah," Hayes said, shaking his head with a dry laugh. "I think we'd make a killing on the galactic tourism market. Too bad the Draconians didn't want to be vacation guests." The Draconian fleet had been forced to retreat, but the victory felt bitter, hollow. Earth had survived, yes. But only just. The very idea that humanity was fighting against beings capable of wiping out entire worlds seemed absurd. Yet here they were, watching as the invincible fleet disintegrated into the vast, cold expanse of space. But Miller knew, deep down, that the fight wasn't over. It never was. Admiral Hayes had been pacing around the command center, his gaze distant. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Everyone in the room could feel the tension hanging in the air, like the remnants of a storm that refused to pass. The Draconians were gone, for now, but their threat was far from eradicated. Miller's thoughts were a mess of conflicting emotions, each one dragging her back to a war she had fought long before this alien invasion. The war between humanity and itself. She had lost friends in battles that hadn't even made it to the history books. Human wars. Wars that killed people in ways that didn't show up in headlines. Wars where the battlefield was your own soul. There were no glorious victories. There were no heroes. Just people, clinging to whatever humanity they had left, trying to survive. Miller turned to Dr. Alan Wright, who had been hunched over a console, still trying to make sense of the data. "Are we really safe?" she asked, her voice low, the exhaustion heavy in her chest. Wright didn't look up from his screen. "We've held them off. For now," he muttered. His voice was distant, as if he too was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "But these readings, they're unlike anything we've seen. Earth's electromagnetic field is doing something different. It's resisting their technology. But that doesn't mean it's permanent." Hayes stopped pacing. "What do you mean, different?" His voice had an edge to it now, like a man clinging to whatever last threads of control he had. "We've won. Haven't we?" Wright's eyes flickered to the screen, his face pale as if the numbers on the console were more horrifying than the fleet that had been poised to destroy them. "I don't know. It's like Earth is alive. But it's not in a way we understand. I've never seen data like this. I can't explain it. And that's what scares me." Miller felt the weight of his words settle like a stone in her gut. The Earth, alive? It wasn't possible. They had always been taught that Earth was a planet, a rock floating in space. But now it seemed like they were dealing with something far beyond their comprehension. Was this the result of some forgotten defense mechanism buried deep in the planet's core? Or was it something worse? A fluke that had somehow saved them for the moment, but might one day turn against them? How long until they figure it out? Miller asked, her voice sharp as she turned to Hayes. Her question was blunt, cutting through the uncertainty. How long until the Draconians find a way to fight back? What happens when their ships stop disappearing? Hayes exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples as if the weight of their situation was beginning to suffocate him. "We're doing everything we can to prepare," he said. "But we're out of time. The fleet may be gone, but they're still watching. And when they come back, we won't be ready." The room went quiet again, the gravity of the situation sinking deeper. They had fought, and they had survived, but no one was delusional enough to believe that this was over. The Draconians were not just going to roll over and die. And Earth, with its mysterious electromagnetic field, might have saved them today, but it wasn't a guarantee for the future. The truth was clear to Miller: there would always be another war. Another fight. Because war wasn't just about the battle on the surface. It was about the battle inside. Inside each and every one of them. She couldn't help but think about the years spent in conflict, the weight of the losses she had endured. The friends who had died in her arms. The people who had promised to be there and never came back. The endless carnage of war, and yet, the world had continued to spin. The world didn't care. It never had. Miller stepped away from the console, her eyes scanning the room. There was no answer. There never was. War was just a machine that kept grinding. The people who fought it were cogs. And one day, Earth, too, would become another cog in the machinery of galactic conflict. The idea of peace was a nice thought, but peace wasn't the real world. The real world was the one where battles were fought in the dirt, where human lives were traded like currency, and where survival often meant abandoning the very thing that made you human. "Well," she said, turning to Wright and Hayes with a dark, ironic smile, "I guess it's safe to say that Earth's defenses are a bit overwhelming. Maybe we should start selling tickets to see the show." Wright's lips twitched, a hint of laughter escaping despite the situation. Hayes, however, just shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "Next time," he said flatly, "let's make sure we charge extra for the front row." Miller chuckled darkly, but it wasn't the laugh of someone who had won a battle. It was the laugh of someone who knew that the worst was still to come. "Yeah," she muttered, "maybe we should start a defensive tourism business. Earth, come for the aliens, stay for the dimensional rift. And with that, the tension in the room broke, if only for a second. Because no one in that room knew what the future held. They were surviving for now. But deep down, they all understood one thing: war wasn't just about fighting. It was about surviving the aftermath. The atmosphere in the command center had shifted. What was once a room filled with urgency and tension now felt like a hollow echo of what could have been a triumphant victory. The Draconian fleet was gone, pulled away by the mysterious force of Earth's electromagnetic field. But Earth's survival wasn't a cause for celebration. It was the silence of a funeral. No one celebrated, no one cheered. There were only faces reflecting disbelief, fear, and the inevitable understanding that what had just happened wasn't a final solution. It was a reprieve. Captain Miller stood at the front of the room, her hands on the edge of a console, staring at the empty space where the Draconian ships had once hovered. Her heart pounded, but not with the rush of adrenaline from battle. No. This was different. This was the hollow weight of knowing the war wasn't over. She thought back to the battles she had fought in, the wars waged in foreign lands, the faces of her comrades lost in the chaos. Their laughter, their jokes, the ones she couldn't even remember now, were gone. In their place were the scars. The scar on her soul, the one that never healed, the one that haunted her every step. It wasn't just the loss of the soldiers that gnawed at her, it was the realization that war was a beast that never truly died. It didn't matter how many victories you won, how many battles you survived. Eventually, the war would return. War was an uninvited guest that always came back, and there was no such thing as a peaceful night. Dr. Wright was still hunched over his console, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he processed the streams of data. His eyes flicked over the monitor, the glowing numbers and graphs dancing in front of him as he tried to make sense of the anomaly that had just saved them. "It's like Earth knew they were coming," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "It's as if the planet's natural defenses knew." Captain Miller couldn't help but scoff. "Earth's natural defenses," she repeated bitterly. "Right. Like the planet is some kind of guardian." Wright looked up, meeting her gaze with a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. "It's more than that. I don't know how to explain it. Earth's electromagnetic field, it's alive in a way we never understood. It's rejecting the Draconians. Their technology can't handle it. It's pulling them out of our dimension." Miller shook her head. "This isn't some divine intervention, Dr. Wright. This is just chance. And nothing good ever comes from chance." Wright didn't argue, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes told a different story. He didn't want to admit it, but part of him was still in awe of what Earth had done. They had survived a galactic invasion by something so simple as the planet's magnetic field. The very thing that had once been a natural resource for navigation, for satellite communication, had just become their greatest weapon. But in the back of his mind, Wright could hear the same voice Miller did, the voice that reminded him that no battle, no war, was ever truly over. He stood, his fingers lingering on the console for a moment before he finally broke the silence. "The Draconians aren't gone. They'll come back. They'll adapt, and when they do, we won't be ready." Miller's eyes narrowed. "You're sure of that?" Wright's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't know what's happening. We don't know why Earth's electromagnetic field has this effect. And if the Draconians come back, they won't be making the same mistake twice." Admiral Hayes entered the room, his tired eyes scanning the group. "What's our status?" he asked, his voice betraying the weariness of a man who had seen far too many battles. Miller looked at him, her face hardening. "We're alive. But we aren't safe. The Draconians are still out there. And I think we both know what that means. The real war hasn't even started yet." The room went quiet again, the air thick with unspoken truths. Hayes stared at the blank radar, as if willing the Draconian ships to reappear. But the reality was far worse than anything he could have imagined. The Draconians weren't going to return the same way. They weren't going to make a second attempt at invading Earth, they were going to try to understand it. They were going to learn. And when they did, humanity would have no idea what to do. And that was the part that terrified him the most. Hours passed, and the command center continued its strained operations. Scientists pored over data, soldiers prepared for the inevitable next phase. Miller sat in her chair, staring at the screens in front of her. She wanted to think they had won, but she couldn't. She couldn't lie to herself. The Draconians were a force beyond anything Earth had ever faced. The fight hadn't ended, it had only just begun. The only difference now was that Earth had no idea what the rules were, and the Draconians were learning them faster than humanity ever could. There was no winning this fight. Not unless you considered surviving as winning. But even that was a farce. She could hear Hayes speaking in the background. "Get ready," he said, his voice steady, calm, as if speaking to soldiers preparing for the next day of battle. "We don't know when they'll be back, but we have to be prepared. This isn't over." Miller sighed deeply, rubbing her eyes. She wanted to speak up, to say something. To tell them they had to stop pretending this was just another war to fight, that Earth wasn't just a battlefield for alien invasions. But she didn't. Instead, she rose slowly, walking over to the window that looked out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed so distant, so unreachable. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, they had been fighting for their lives. Now, all they could do was wait. "Surviving, huh?" she muttered under her breath. "Yeah," Hayes said, his voice dark with a bitter edge. "Surviving. Just another Tuesday in the life of humanity." Miller chuckled dryly. "What a great tagline for a t-shirt. Earth, where survival is our only hobby." Everyone in the room stiffened at the dark humor, but Miller couldn't help herself. It was either laugh or go mad. And if there was one thing Miller had learned from all the wars she had fought in, it was that laughter, however dark, was the only thing that kept you from breaking. "Yeah," Hayes said, smirking slightly despite the gravity of the situation. "Maybe we should sell them at the next galactic convention." "Sure," Miller replied with a sigh, "and I'll design the merch. Survival, 100% guaranteed, but don't expect anything more." Earth's mysterious electromagnetic field continues to rip through space. The Draconians are left in disarray. But who, or what, is behind this unimaginable defense? The truth is darker than you think. What will happen when the Draconians return, knowing they can't defeat Earth's hidden power? Stay tuned as the final confrontation begins to unfold. We want to hear from you. Do you think Earth can really protect itself, or will the Draconians find a way back? Comment your theories below and hit that like button if you want to see more sci-fi secrets uncovered. Don't forget to subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story for the latest stories from the front lines of galactic warfare. What's next for Earth? The answer is waiting, but only for those brave enough to follow.